Then you have chairs, and you have dogs, and you have horses, and you have buildings, and you have rocks, and you have wind. You have all these material things all have an essence. But he also taught that there was the existence of things that don't actually have an essence. And without getting too deep into this, but this one, Platonism, is, according to William Lane Craig, is one of the most significant challenges. He even says that he spent 13 years of his career working on this one issue, studying it and working through it. But that you understand that that was the primary thinking of everybody in this entire culture and society. And then here, John writes, yeah, you're basically all wrong. Today, it's all about better. How do you get better? How do you experience better? Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. I am the Salty Pastor. I have been a pastor for 38 years, but now I am retired. I have a bachelor's in Bible, I have a master's in education, and then a doctorate of ministry degree. I have a love of philosophy, history, archaeology, and science. And therefore, I combine all of the experience, all the education, and all of my loves in order to bring you an unfiltered truth. I'm not trying to convince anybody to be a part of a denomination. I am simply committed to helping you grow in your faith by teaching you how to think for yourself. Give you the basic facts, then let you figure it out. Because if you're a person who believes that your spiritual journey is your journey, then you don't want someone telling you how to do it. It's more important to point the direction and then make the journey yourself. We all know this to be true. The most rewarding experiences in life, the most transformational experiences in life, the most educational experiences in life are those in which we are on a journey ourselves. It's where we go and experience something for ourselves. It's when we challenge ourselves to do something new. It is when we embark on an adventure. It's when we do it that we grow the most. So the Salty Pastor is here for you, not to tell you what to think, not to tell you what to believe, but to give you direction so you can experience life itself. There's an old cliche out there that kind of goes like this. Religion is for people who are afraid to go to hell. Spirituality is for people who have already been there. And this little cliche has some truth to it. That is, some people grow up in a society, a culture, where they think that they're doing fine, but they're afraid to go to hell. So they get religious. Right? They want to make sure they're doing everything right because they don't want to go to the bad place, wherever that may be, according to them. On the other hand, people who have experienced difficult things in life, people who have had to overcome challenges, setbacks, want more out of life. They want something better than just what they have already lived. And that's why it is so important to understand that this is your journey of faith. Can't do it for you, but we can help you become that spiritual person you long to be. Now, today's theme is continuing on about ideologies. And we're going to now start to get specific about how ideologies that people believe and where they come from can result in less, not more. It's bleh, not better. It's worse. It's not good. And by digging into these things, it really helps you form your own beliefs, your own convictions, and it also helps you think more clearly for yourself. Because when you clarify what you believe and then you start aligning your life with what you believe, that's when you experience the better. So in order to experience the better, you have to do more than just want it. You have to make the adjustments in order to experience it. And so we're going to kind of embark on that. Now, what I want to do is, like I always do, is I want to start with the Bible, and I want to go back to the Gospel according to John. And the reason why I want to go back here is because I need you to understand something about the first chapter of the Gospel of John. And what we need to understand is how radical the first 15 to 20 verses of gospel according to John really are. When you go and you read like Luke, or you go and you read Matthew, you quickly see the statements about prophecy and genealogies. And so these were written to people that had a strong Jewish orientation. And what I find so fascinating about the Gospel of John is that it doesn't start there at all. As a matter of fact, it starts with one of the most radical premises in the Roman world. It was radical historically, and we'll dig into that in just a moment. It is radical philosophically. It is radical religiously. It's radical politically. And in order for you to understand how radical it is, you can't read it like a person in the 21st century or even the 20th century. What do I mean by that? Well, Western civilization has been so influenced by Jesus Christ, his philosophy, the teaching of the New Testament, that if you grew up in America in the last 100 years, you either consciously or subconsciously have been inundated with the New Testament core values, whether you believe in Jesus or not. And that is the sanctity of human life, the equality of mankind, and so forth and so forth. A lot of these things come from the New Testament scriptures. And so when you read First John, you're reading from a framework in your own mind that is already influencing you to the point that you're not reading it like a first century Roman or Gentile. And so you're not going to catch how radical what John was saying and then how transformative it's become because you grew up in the culture that was transformed by it. Does that make sense? I hope so. And so I want to read it and we're going to talk about it a little bit, okay? Now, the first thing is this. It says, John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. So the very first thing that you see is this statement that in the beginning was the Word. This is truth. This is the living ethos or logos. It says that this living logos was with God, was God, in the beginning with God, and all things came into being by him. So he's basically the creator of all things. Now, this was a pretty radical concept historically. First and foremost, in Jewish teaching, God, Yahweh, created all things in the book of Genesis and in the Torah. The rabbinical literature emphasized this over and over again. There was no triune Godhead. There was no interrelationality of the Godhead in rabbinical teaching. It was a monotheistic emphasis, even though in the ancient Hebrew, in Genesis chapter 1, when it talks about creating men and women, it says, let us create them male and female in our image. The Hebrew actually uses a plural pronoun to refer to God, which is kind of unique. So the point being simply that, though, this notion is what John is getting at. It was a real challenge for those steeped in the rabbinical literature. But more than that, it was also a massive challenge to the Roman pagan deities, because their entire notion of creation, their entire notion of the Godhead was radically different than anything that most people in the world believe today. In the first century, Roman creation beliefs were basically Hellenistic in nature. This is mean they were based on the Greek mythology that came before the Roman Empire. And in Greek mythology, basically there was this primordial void known as chaos. And so you could say that this was the first power, so to speak, is the way they understood it. And then out of this chaos, this primordial void, which was the universe, emerged the Earth Mother, known as Terra Mater or Tellus Mater. And this was one of the first beings to actually materialize. Now, what's really interesting is this is highly reflected in the movies about the Avengers, right? That whole, they call it a cosmere, but basically this Hollywood created thing. And you see it in the movie, The Guardians of the Galaxy come out, and they basically talk about, this is I believe the second movie where Star-Lord, meets his father, and they basically use the Roman mythology of creation to explain how his father came into existence, right? He just emerged, and eventually consciousness came up. And so it's really interesting as how the Terra Mater or the Tellus Mater, Mother Earth, some people call this Gaia, right, started to give birth to other deities. Zeus, Jupiter. And so this entire narrative focused on a cosmic order emerging from a formless state. But Romans in particular placed more of an emphasis on the founding myth of Rome itself rather than the wider cosmic origins. And if you read about that, you see that there was these, there was Aeneas and Romulus, and they're quite interesting. In their mythology is that Romulus and Remus were the sons of Ray Silvia, the daughter of the king of Numitor, or Alba Longa. I know I'm not, don't get hung up on all these names, please. And then Ray was impregnated by the god of war, or Mars, okay? And then King Amulius, Numitor's younger brother, ordered the twins to be killed, but the twins were placed in a basket and put into the Tiber River, and the basket washed up on the riverbank, where they were found by a she-wolf, right? And so that's why you see in the origins of some of the most ancient sculptures in Rome, you see the she-wolf with nipples to feed these brothers. And then Romulus ended up founding Rome after killing his brother Remus. So it was an empire created out of violence. And so you can see some actual flavors of similarity to the Genesis story. That is when, Moses was put in a reed. You can see how Rome was founded because Romulus killed his brother Remus, and you have the story of Cain and Abel. And so you see some of these things. What's interesting, though, is that the story in Genesis, where all of these things originally took place, happened at least 500 years before the founding of Rome. And so these stories could have been, circulating quite vociferously. In other words, they were everywhere. So I'm telling you all this history because I want you to understand how radical it was what John was writing to the Romans. They believed all of this stuff. And basically what he's saying is that, no, there wasn't this primordial nothingness entity that existed. Mother Earth did not come together out of it. These things are critically important to understand. What he's saying is that in the beginning was Jesus, and he was the living truth. He was the light. And so this was a historically radical thing for Romans and Gentiles to read in their common age. It was philosophically radical. And the reason why is because, well, I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's about Platonism. And Platonism was really interesting, and that is that Plato taught that there was a reality, a metaphysical essence of all things that you see material. Like, oh, okay, well, there's a salty pastor named Doug Peak. He has a body and hair and all that kind of stuff. then you have chairs and you have dogs and you have horses and you have buildings and you have rocks and you have wind. Yeah, all these material things all have an essence. But he also taught that there was the existence of things that don't actually have an essence. And without getting too deep into this, what Platonism does in some ways is, according to William Lane Craig, it's one of the most significant challenges to the existence of God as opposed to atheism. Atheism actually does a really poor job of, challenging the fact that there is no God. And the primary reason for this is atheism uses all the things that God creates in order to try to prove God doesn't exist. Things like rationale, logic, mathematics, blah, blah, so forth, so forth. But this one, Platonism, is, according to William Lane Craig, is one of the most significant challenges. He even says that he spent 13 years of his career working on this one issue, studying it and working through it. I mean, that's pretty significant for a person of William Lane Craig's caliber and how to answer this question. And the reason I want you to understand this is not so that you can get the abstract nature of Platonism, but that you understand that that was the primary thinking of everybody in this entire culture and society. And then here, John writes, you're basically all wrong. Jesus is not only the essence, the living word. See, that's why he's using this terminology, is because in Platonism, it's not just knowledge. A lot of people try to say, well, they call Jesus the living word because the Romans valued knowledge, the Greeks valued knowledge. But that doesn't give you the whole essence of why this is so radical. What they were Platonists. And so it wasn't facts. See, we read it like, well, knowledge is facts. They didn't read it that way. They believed that knowledge was an essence and it was pure. And what he's saying is that, no, it is not a metaphysical reality apart from Jesus, because Jesus is that and everything else. So that was really radical philosophical shift. And we don't actually see the impact of that philosophical shift in Western civilization for another 3 to 7 centuries. I mean, that's how long it takes to kind of play out. This radical teaching in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Was a huge challenge to religion across the board. And it didn't matter if you were Jewish and from a monotheistic Judaism, or if you were a Roman pagan worshiper, or maybe you were a Gentile and you had maybe some tribal beliefs or ethnic group beliefs. What's fascinating about this statement is how radical it was, because up to this point, you have to understand the Roman Empire was massive and it ran into all kinds of religions from all over the place. If you ever see the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe, they do a fairly good job of representing this in kind of a very subtle way. And they talk about, whatever gods you honor those gods. And that was their way of being a religious culture that was very, very diverse. However, what the movie doesn't represent is how unreligiously diverse they were in other areas, particularly when it came to Caesar, because Caesar was considered a god, right? And he was going to enter the demigod ranks when he died or so forth. He was to be treated as a god. And so when this was written, it was basically saying that Jesus is the only God here on earth, and he is challenging every other deity out there. This is why early Christians in the Roman Empire, you may not know this, but they were persecuted. And you know the charge that was brought against them in the early persecution? It was the charge of atheism. That's right. Early followers of Jesus were accused of atheism. And the reason why is because they would not acknowledge Caesar as a god or soon to be potential God. They wouldn't do that. They said there's only one Lord, Jesus Christ. And that's the only Lord that they would bow to. But in the Romans' mind, they had all these gods. And so they were like, well, Jesus is a great teacher, and maybe he's like a Caesar who's going to become a god, and he's just one of the many. But this is the problem with Gnosticism, by the way. But what he ends up doing is he simply says in this first 5 chapters is that Jesus is all of this and more. Everything is in him. The light shone in the darkness, and the darkness could not comprehend it. Another way to say it is it could not overpower it. And so that's a really interesting Greek word that they use there. So what am I trying to get at? What's the main point in having this discussion? Okay. Well, the main point in having this discussion is all about the simple truth that John's statement was so radical at every level. You can understand why they were so harshly persecuted for the next 200 years. It was a historically radical statement. It was a philosophically radical statement. It was a religiously radical statement. And it was political, because Caesar could not be God in any way, shape, or form, no matter what he said. And so this is one of the reasons why they were blamed for every problem in the Roman Empire. It's why Nero, when he lit Rome on fire and burned a third of it to the ground, he blamed it on the Christians. And so it's really important to understand that what John is writing here is radical. Now, why is it important for you to understand how radical what John is writing here? Why do you need to understand why it's so radical? Why do you need to have a sense of how transformational his writings are? Why do you need to get your hands around what an early Gentile or Roman would feel and experience when they read these words? Well, I think the reason why is because it will show you how to live better. It will show you the process of going from A to B in every area of your life. It shows you, if you can understand where the people were thinking and believing and their core values, would read those words, how challenging it was for them to reorient their entire belief system. What that does is that helps you start to evaluate your own belief system. It helps you evaluate and ask yourself better questions, so that then what you end up doing is you start to come to better conclusions. Now, why in the world would you want to do that? Why in the world does anybody want to work through what they believe and why they believe it? Why in the world would you want to spend all this time being introspective? Why in the world does it make any difference in how you live? Well, because it makes all the difference in the world. It makes absolutely all the difference in the world. If you're a man and you want to understand what masculinity is, if you want to find your direction and purpose in life, then you have to wrestle with a belief of who you are and why you are here. If you don't ever wrestle with that, you'll never understand yourself as a man. You have to wrestle with this deep question when it comes to the values and the code of honor that you want to live as a man. You can't have values, you can't have a code of honor until you wrestle with the question, why am I here and what is the point and purpose in my life? If you don't know what that is and you don't have a sense of a code of honor and code of values, you'll never be able to walk any path in life. It'll just meander into nothing. And then you'll never have a fight or battle to win because you won't know what battle to fight. You'll be, as Paul says, constantly boxing the air. You're not actually fighting against anything that's real. So the reason why all of this is so important, the reason why you should wrestle with it, the reason why you should come to certain conclusions about these things, why you should understand the transformational process that the first century followers of Jesus had to deal with when they read these words, is because it reveals to you how to discover everything that's better in life. That's why. It shows you how to have a better peace about your life. It shows you how to have better relationships in your life. It shows you how to have a better sense of meaning and purpose in your life. It shows you how to have better core values in life, a stronger code of honor. It shows you how to live a better life. So it's so important to understand that the words in the first chapter of the Gospel of John were radical to the people who read them and heard them. And that's why I think it's so important for you to consider them in the same way. I just want to kind of wrap up what we're doing today with the following. Verse 6. Now there came a man sent from God whose name was John. He came for a witness, that he might bear witness of the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came that he might bear witness of the light. There was the true light, which, coming into the world, enlightens every man. Now, I want to stop here because I want you to understand verse 9 is sometimes mistranslated a little bit. Well, let me put this. It's difficult to translate. And so scholars pick things. So it says, there was a true light, which, coming into the world, enlightens every man. Or it could be read, there was the true light, which enlightens every man coming into the world. So you see how there's a little bit of different flavor there. Verse 10. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. Verse 10 is a fascinating verse to me, because basically what he's saying is that everybody who lives in the world, you would think, right, would know him, but they don't. They don't know him, even though he created the world. The world was made through him. That to me is a really significant point. It's like a fish who lives in the water and then says, well, I don't know water, right? I don't know it, even though it's required for its existence. And so I find that fascinating, because what is John getting at here? What is he really digging at in that is that Jesus came into the world, something that was made through him. So you would think that the world would know him. So it's like he became a fish in the water, and yet all the other fish had no idea that the water existed. There's something irrational or illogical about that. Something had to interfere with humanity's understanding of who God was. And of course, that's the whole issue of the fall of man in Genesis chapter 3 and the issue of Satan. Notice what he then says next in verse 11. Jesus came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. Now, the word own can also be translated domain. So he came to his domain, and those who were his domain did not receive him. And so it's kind of a reference to the fact that he came to the Israelites first. Okay? Verse 12. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but they were born of God. This is another really radical thing. And that is, because Caesars and rulers would say, well, I'm a child, like Hercules of a woman and a god, or, these types of things, because it's so woven into their pagan mythology. Or you could say that in Judaism, right, you're born into it of blood, right? You're Jewish because you have the DNA of Jews. Your parents were Jews. Notice how he challenges all the different belief systems outside of Christ. He says, those who received him are the ones who were beget of God. So these statements are so challenging and radical to anybody who was living in the first century. And I think that is one of the greatest enlightening things to discover about this passage, because what it does is it says to me is that maybe my journey starts there too. Maybe I need to get rid of the notions of what I was born into. Maybe I need to get rid of the notions of what I was culturally taught. Maybe I need to get rid of the traditions of men, and I need to get back to the purity of being beget of God. I must be beget of God. Now, if you're a person who's contrarian or radical out there, you're going, aha, that means we should get rid of all cultural traditions. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It says we should get rid of all forms of religion. No, it doesn't mean that either. We should never, some people try to go to this and say, hey, this means we're going to eliminate everything we're doing. No, it doesn't mean that at all. What it means is that you understand where your source of salvation, redemption, transformation comes from. It doesn't come from a religion or from blood or tradition or a culture. It comes from Jesus Christ and Christ alone. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to apply this truth to the issue of feminism on Thursday and help people, particularly women and men, understand why relationships are so much more difficult today than ever before. In the meantime, I would love for you to become a regular supporter of the Salty Pastor. You can go to our website and you can click on the donate button and just sign up for a recurring gift. Everything that you give makes this possible. I believe that what I'm teaching is straight from the scriptures. I'm not trying to get you a denominational perspective, a creed, or some systematic theology. I'm just trying to give you the New Testament in its essence so that you can decide for yourself your next step in your journey of faith. Please join me. And if you are a believer, please join in supporting this ministry because I believe it's making a massive difference. Until then, Salty Pastor signing off. Remember, always think for yourself.